You're welcome to another session of the Pilot Ground Briefs. My name is Habib Wale Hussein, and in this session, we're going to be reviewing how to fill out a navlog. So, if you're familiar with the Pilot Ground Briefs, just in case if you're watching on YouTube, to give you some context, the Pilot Ground Briefs will go over different topics on the ACS. And in this session, this is going to be a supplement to the skills section of the cross-country flight planning in the ACS. So I created a scenario here where it says, we are required to fill out a navlog. So I'll just go through the scenario here. It says, prior to the day of your check ride, your examiner told you to plan for a cross-country flight from KISM to KBKV, and he will need you to provide a full risk analysis based on real-time weather and also provide information on any applicable NOTAMs that may affect your flight. So this is the scenario here. So it will require us to fill out a navlog. When you have to fill out a cross-country navigation log, the very first thing you need is a sectional chart. So over here I have my FORFlight open. It's basically going to show me a typical sectional chart. So if you have your FORFlight app, you can come to the icon that looks like this just to make sure your map is properly set up. You look for where it says USVFR and make sure you have this sectional map overlaid on the map. So if you have something like this, it's going to be a different look. You see that? That's for IFR. We do not want that for the purpose of this session. So we want a VFR navigation log. So here, this is our departure airport right here. So once we have this set up, the next thing we need is our navigation log form. And I'll show you a navigation log form here. So this is a nav log form that we need to fill out. So the blue fonts are where I already started filling out, and just to save some time, I'll go over them with you soon shortly. But the general idea is this form is going to be empty when you start, and this is how you plan your nav log, usually for your check ride. So there's two ways to do it. You could do it on the app or you could do it on the form, which I would recommend in order to get a very good understanding of actually how to fill this out. And to make your life easier on your check ride, I would recommend always using the form. So the first thing you want to do is actually get a weather briefing when you're about to file a cross-country navigation log form. And if you come to the second part of the form here, the second page, or behind the form, if you have a physical copy, it has a weather log. So in the weather log, you just want to fill out where it tells you your departure information, en route information, destination, and for your alternate. So you want to fill out the following weather parameters. So we'll need to put the reported ceilings, visibility, and precipitation, also what is forecasted, and the winds aloft. If there's any icing or freezing levels reported, you'll need to fill those out. If there's any turbulence, you can put that on there. In your fronts, you can also put all that information on there. So the best way to get a weather briefing usually is to call a briefer, but for the purpose of this flight, I'll use my personal favorite method, which is using FORFlight to get my weather information. So in order to use FORFlight, I'll come back here to my FORFlight app, and what I'm going to do is, KISM is my departure point. So I come here to my airport as my departure point. I click on that to get my airport. Come out here to my flight plan. I already pre-selected a couple of points here, but if I come out here to my airport, I get my airport here. It's the Kissimmee Gateway Airport, that's KISM. So what I want to do is come to the weather tab here on FORFlight, and I look at my METAR. So currently has a special observation. So what you want to do is look at the time, consider the time you're going to be flying, right? So the departure airport right now, it looks like this is the current weather. So what I'm going to do is come back here to my form and determine what it says is the reported weather for the ceiling, visibility, and the precipitation for my departure airport. So I can come back here to full flight and look at what is currently reported, and then I'll look at what the forecast is. Everything should be based on like my departure time, but for the sake of this tutorial, to keep it a little bit more simple, I'll get my numbers from here. So what is reported currently is saying winds are 100 knots, 100 degrees at 5 knots, visibility is 10 statute miles, and cloud is few at 200 feet and scattered at 4,200 feet. So I really don't have a hard ceiling here with my cloud coverage. So the next thing I'll look at here is the next one, which says broken at 049, which means its cloud ceiling is broken at 4,900. So this will be my ceiling right here, because these two are not considered ceilings. A few are scattered and not considered ceilings. So broken at 4,900 will be my ceiling. So I'll come here and put broken at 4,900 as my ceiling. And the visibility is 10 statute miles, it says, and there's no precipitation, so I'm not gonna put anything for precipitation. And then I'll come back here to the weather and take a look at what it says for my forecast. So for the forecast, you want to look at the TAF. So the TAF is the terminal aerodrome forecast, right? So assuming I probably want to fly at about 4 p.m. I'd say I probably want to look at this TAF and see what the weather says. So it's currently saying this is for 2 p.m. You can use the codes to decode that, but to make it a little bit easier, I'll come in here. It says today for the current forecast, it looks like it's going to be broken at 3,500, and there may be thunderstorms in the vicinity in cumulonimbus clouds, and the visibility is plus 6 statute miles. So I'll come back here to my navlog and put broken at 3,900 plus 6 statute miles visibility, and thunderstorms in the vicinity. So put thunderstorms right there for that section. And then the next thing I'll do is for my winds aloft, I'll consider my winds aloft. So I'll come back here and look at winds. So whenever you come here to the winds on full flight, it shows you your winds aloft. So typically starts from about 3,000 feet, goes to 6,000, and then to 9,000, 12,000. So what you want to do is look at the time frame you're going to be flying at. So this is currently for 3 p.m. So my assumption is I'll be flying at about 4 p.m. So I can use the 3 p.m. scale. So if I come out here, the altitude I'll probably decide to fly will be at 4,500, because I'm going to be heading on the west direction, as you'll see shortly. So in order to get the right weather here, I could either interpolate the weather in between these two altitudes, or I could just pick the weather at 3,000. So to keep it a little bit simple, I'll pick the weather at the winds aloft weather parameters at 3,000 for my winds aloft. So I'll get the winds and I'll get the temperature in this situation. So it currently says my winds aloft right there, it's going to be 053 degrees at 5 knots. So just to save us some time, I went ahead and filled out the rest of the weather portion. So you can do the same thing for your en route portion. Just go to the METAR, pick an airport somewhere in the middle of your route and get that and fill that out. And then for your forecast, just get the TAF, and for your winds aloft, you can check the winds portion of ForeFlight. Once I'm done with the navlog, I'll show you another method of getting the winds aloft. But for now, we'll come back to the navlog here and take a look at how to successfully fill this out. So the first thing you need to do is get your sectional, like I said, and then pick out your checkpoints. So the way I go through the navlog is I just work my way from the left all the way to the right till I fill everything out here. And then as I do that, once I'm done with the first row, I move to the second row, fill that out, and then move to the third one and fill everything out. So that's the idea on how to fill this out. So I'll come back here to my sectional chart here, and once you have your sectional chart out, if you're doing this on ForeFlight, you want to come in here to your flight plan. You're going to put in your first airport, Kissimmee, to KBKV. You want to put your route. So once you do that, it gives you a straight line. So after you get the straight line, the next thing you want to do is pick out your checkpoints. So to save some time, I went ahead and picked some checkpoints here to make life a lot easier for us. So this is my departure airport here, the Kissimmee Gateway Airport, and it gives me a straight line all the way. It goes out to the west, all the way out here to KBKV. So KBKV here is the Brooksville Regional Airport. So the Brooksville Tampa Bay Regional Airport. So that's it right there. So what I want to do is just come in closer on my straight line and pick out my checkpoints. So like I said, I already picked out my checkpoints. And the first checkpoint I picked out here, as I can see, is a whole bunch of buildings here, like the yellow sign of the yellow areas on the sectional charts basically just tell you about where you have buildings, and at night is going to be full of lights. And then we have a highway here, the I-4, which is a pretty popular highway in this local area. So I picked that. So that will be my first checkpoint right there. So that's part of like my pilotage. So once I'm flying, I'll know once I hit this point, that will be my first checkpoint. So what you want to do is pick that point and put that on your navlog. So before I get to that point, what I want to do on my checkpoints is put the departure airport here first, and then I also reserve a spot for my top of climb. So the top of climb is basically another section we're going to use for special type of calculations. Just because once we take off, we're not immediately going to get our altitude. We're actually going to be gradually climbing before we get to our cruise altitude. So top of climb is there for us to calculate these numbers here for that point of the flight where we're actually gradually climbing up. So my first checkpoint I'm going to put here after my top of climb, which is the I-4 highway, like you've seen. And then the second checkpoint I'm going to use is going to be out here, also close to like where there's a bunch of buildings, and then all of a sudden there's nothing. So it's just swamp, or just green grass. So that's what it looks like. So that'll be my second checkpoint right there. So while I'm picking out my checkpoints, what I also like to do, just to slowly start filling out the navlog, is I like to get the distances. So I'll grab my ruler here from ForeFlight, and I'll basically draw from the airport all the way to my first checkpoint to see what the distance is. So see, it's currently about 6.9 miles. So probably say roughly 7 miles. I'll put 7 miles on my navlog right there. So if you come here, basically from this point right here, it's going to be from that point, it's going to be 7 miles right there. So this is where you have to be careful, because this first point right here doesn't use anything, and for the top of climb you want to leave that empty for now, because it's going to be a special calculation to determine the distance. So this is where we record the distance. So I want to come out here to the I-4 highway here and put my distance here. So I will have to be careful, because the the box for the distance is leg, and then it gives you the remaining leg that you put at the bottom. So I'm going to put it in here. So I have 7 nautical miles for my distance. I'll get that centered up. So that's my first distance, and then I'll come back here to my map. Then what I can do is look at my second checkpoint. So my second checkpoint looks like in this local area. I'm familiar with these buildings that are here. They sort of look like warehouses, and as you can see here, there's a road here that goes through these blue lines. This, if you come out here, it says this is the I-4 highway here, intersects with Highway 27. So I already know this is the I-4 highway. So this road here is the Highway 27. So I can use this Highway 27 here as my checkpoint with these buildings. So that's what I put on there, Highway 27 and the warehouses. So what I'm going to do next is just get the distance, and I can put that on my navlog. So I grab my ruler once again, put that distance from there to there. So that's about 6.5 miles. So come back, and this time around I'm going to use this section here for 6.5 nautical miles. So that's my distance for this point right here. So you do not want to confuse the boxes. It could get a little bit tricky, but just, you know, watch out for that. So once you get the distance, you do the same thing for the next intersection. So come back for my map here. So the next checkpoint, you do the same thing for the next checkpoint. So my next checkpoint, if I fly out here, I see a road here. I see a point here, it says Ava. It's a road intersection right here. So it's basically 2 roads intersecting. So what I can do is just use this point as my next checkpoint. So I'll use Ava. It's basically, if I'm flying this way, it's going to be to my left. I'll just grab my ruler and measure that. So it looks like it's going to be about 7.3 miles. So come here, I put the Ava road intersections 2 miles to the left, that's my checkpoint, and I put 7.3 miles as the distance. 7.3 nautical miles. And then come back to my map, I look at my next checkpoint on my line. I pick my next checkpoint and I measure the distance. So my next checkpoint here, I see there's a couple of power lines here. So I selected this point here for the power lines. So if you really want to know what all these things mean on the sectional chart, you can always come to the legend. If you look here, it tells you anything that looks like this is a power transmission line right there. So I come back here and I see this right here. It looks like a good checkpoint. It should be visible. So I pick that as my next checkpoint. So I use my ruler again to measure the distance, and then I put the checkpoint and the distance on my navlog. So about 11.1. So I'll assume that's about 11 miles. So I have the Ava road intersection there, and then the power transmission lines, the next one. So from Ava to the power transmission lines will be 11 nautical miles. So I try to keep my legs typically between 10 to not more than 15 nautical miles for the checkpoints. So that's a rule of thumb, or just a tip to use for your checkpoints. And then the next thing I'll do is come back here and figure out what my next checkpoint is. So I continue my route. So obviously you want to have airspace considerations. I don't have any complex airspace around me right here, but if you go through airspace, the important airspace is to consider. Like out here, there's a TFR out here. I avoided that by staying to the south. So I'm coming back to my next checkpoint here. I pick this next checkpoint here, so I grab my ruler. I see there's a city here, so usually whenever you see a flag like this, it means, you know, it's like a VFR. It's like, you see, when you have something, it could give you like a power plant or like a VFR checkpoint that you can easily identify. So it says here that features normally used as checkpoints for controlling VFR traffic are emphasized in this series of charts, so they may be readily identified. So that's a good point I see right there. I could come back here. It says it's date city, so I'll just measure the distance and use that as my next checkpoint from the previous one. So it gives me about 8.9, I'll say 9 nautical miles, just to keep it a lot simple. So I'll say 9 nautical miles. So I put the power transmission lines there. Then the next one will be to Date City, which is 9 nautical miles. And then I'll come back here to my next checkpoint. So my next checkpoint I see here has a road. So I can just, you know, zoom out here to see what this road is, if it's a big highway. So it looks like it's a big highway. It's the I-75. Comes all the way down here. So I can use the I-75 as my next checkpoint, which is what I use here, I-75. And then I measure the distance and put that in there. So this looks like it's going to be a short distance. So it's about 5 nautical miles right there. So I come back here, put from Date City to I-75, I put 5 nautical miles. And then the last distance is pretty much just going to be from I-75 to the airport. So I come out here and measure my distance from I-75 to my destination right there. So I have this all the way down here. It's about 9.5 miles. So I come out here and put 9.5 miles. So what I'm going to do is add everything up here and put the total here. So that is going to give me a very good idea of the total distance for my trip. So if I get my calculator and I put all these numbers on here, add 7 plus 6.5 plus 7.3 plus 11 plus 9 plus 5 plus 9.5 shows me 55.3 miles. So I have 55.3 miles total. So you can just put this, if you're doing this by hand, I'll suggest using a pen, because we'll have to make a few adjustments here once we figure out what our top of climb is. But it's important to know what your total distance is. So once you get this, what I want you to do is just come back to the chart and take a look at what the total distance is. Also, if you come on ForeFlight, it makes it very easy. It shows you it's about 55 nautical miles, right? So from using my ruler, I was off by roughly about 0.3 miles, which is not too bad, but that's what I got from my calculations. So obviously your trips or your routes is not always going to be a straight line, right? So sometimes you may go out just to avoid a certain airspace. You know, if you have to do that, feel free to do that. Or, you know, if you have to do something like that, choose another route. Your route may look something like that, if you're trying to avoid something. So it always doesn't have to be a straight line. A straight line is the most efficient route possible. So if you can, fly straight, obviously fly straight, but it is not a necessity. So just move that down there. So I'll come back here to my navlog here. So once we're done getting all the distances, the next thing we want to do is come out here to this row. We want to fill this out. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm not going to use the VORs. I like to use the VORs more for like IFR flights. But just in case if you'd like to use a VOR, if you want to use a VOR for your flights, I will recommend using for VOR for VFR flights as well. It can help you figure out where you are in case you're lost. So you could pick a VOR facility close to the airport. So if I come to see me right now, the closest VOR facility looks like it's here at Orlando Executive. So usually airports that have this round thing right here, this solid blue round dials, they have VOR. So what you want to do is look at the VOR box. It says VORTAC. You can get the frequency and the 3-letter identifier or the Morse code, and you put that in the navlog. So this, for example, I could just put this here. Put the identifier will be ORL, or I could put the Morse code. In this situation, it will be a lot easier for me to put in the 3-letter identifier, and then the frequency is 112.2. So it's the same thing on your route. Just figure out the closest VOR and just put the details for the VOR in there, the identifier and the frequency. So I'll move on to the next thing, which is a course. So in order to select your course, you need to come back here to the map, and you want to use your ruler. So once you click on your ruler, you can just stretch that out to this point, and as you can see, shows us our course is 288 degrees. So we'll come back here and put 288 degrees on the route. So just because our route is pretty much a straight line, so to make life easier, I just put 288 degrees for every checkpoint because it's a straight line. So if you have to make turns here and there on your route, obviously you want to measure a different course for each heading change you're making on your route. So that's the idea. And then the next thing to come is here, we have to come out to our altitude. So when we're planning cross-country flights, there's a rule for altitude selection. So I'll come here and look. It tells us the altitude selection here. Says if your magnetic course or your ground track is from 0 degrees to 179 degrees, and you're more than 3,000 feet above the surface but below 18,000 feet MSL, fly 1,000 MSL plus 500. Or if you're 180 to 359, you fly even thousands MSL plus 500. So typically starting from 4,500. So our course is at 288 degrees, which falls in this section right here. So we're going to either choose 4,500, 6,500, and so on, up to but not including 18,000 feet. So for the purpose of our flight plan, we'll choose 4,500 because we're not flying too far. So this is probably one of the shortest cross-country flights you could ever get. So we'll pick 4,500. Come back here to our navlog. So I can just put that in this section here for a reference. But if I come in here, let's remember this altitude here is going to be for our top of climb. So for our top of climb here, if in the notes section, this is where I normally put my notes. It says for top of climb calculations, use medium climb altitude. That is the cruise altitude divided by 2. So the medium climb altitude in this scenario would be about 2,250 if we had to use altitude for this point. But other than that, everything else would be about 4,500. So I can just copy that and just add that to everywhere else. So just to save some time, I've gone ahead and updated the altitude for every section because our route is pretty much in the same direction. So we're going to be flying all at the same altitude all the way till we get close to the airport where we start descending. So over here, some people do calculate the top of descent, but I'm not going to do that in my tutorial today. It's not necessary. But on the top of climb, it's important to include that in your calculations. So coming back here, the next thing we're going to fill out is the wind. So the wind tells you need to put a wind direction in the box, the velocity, and then the temperature at the bottom. So what we're going to do is, this is why it's important to get your weather briefing ahead. So we do have our winds from our wind aloft that we copied for this location here. So as you go through your routes, that's why you need to get a weather source for your en route data. So if you have your en route winds aloft as well, you'll be able to use the en route for this portion, and then at their destination or close to your destination, you can use the weather data as gotten close to the destination for these portions. So coming down here to my weather log, I already got my winds aloft for my departure airport, which is 53 degrees at 5 knots. So I'll come back here and put 53. And the velocity is 5. And then the temperature. It's important to also put the temperature whenever you get the temperature. But I'll come back here to the airport and get the winds and get the temperature. So it looks like the weather updated. But temperature is currently sitting about 21 degrees, which was the same thing I got earlier. So it's going to be 21 degrees Celsius. And I'll just update this to be 56, or I can just leave it at this for now, so we have like a consistent weather, since we're just using this for, it's not exactly a practical application, it's just for the concept. So we come down here, the next point, since it's close to this airport, we're going to use the same data. So I'll just copy that and add that here as well. Point is also close enough, so I'll add that here as well, and I'll put the temperature in there as well. That's 21 degrees, and that's 21 degrees here. So once I get to this point, I'm already getting a little bit farther away from this station here where I got the winds aloft. So I might probably want to use the winds aloft en route for this section here. So I'll see what it says here. So the en route weather we got from the Lakeland Airport. So it says currently it's 51 degrees at 3 knots. So I'll just check the current version for the temperature. So it says 51 degrees at 3 knots. So if we come back here, it says 51, 3 knots, and then we'll check what the temperature says here on the app. So if we come down here to the Lakeland Airport, which is here, it's actually not too far from our point right there. You can check the weather. So 51 at 3 knots, about 22 degrees. Put 22 right there, and then we'll do the same thing for this point right here, since it's close enough. and then to this next point right here, coming to Highway 75 and date Highway 75. Well, at this point we're a lot closer to KBKV, so what we can do is use the destination's winter loft. The situation, which is going to be this 51 degrees at 3 knots as well, so close enough. So we'll put that in there. At 3 knots, and the temperature is going to be the same thing. So, and all the way down to the airport, 51 at 3 knots and 22 degrees for the temperature. So that's how you fill out the wind section. Just check the winter loft for your departure, for areas close to the departure airport. Check the en route section for your winter loft for your en route section. Typically at the altitude close to your cruise altitude, you get the wind direction, velocity, and the temperature, and just put that in this section here. Then the next thing we're going to calculate is the CAS. So the CAS is the calibrated airspeed, and the TAS, which is the true airspeed. So in order to calculate these numbers, there's a trick I use, which is I use the acronym called ICTG. So I'll put that in here in my notes section. I usually put that up there to help me track what I'm calculating. So have I, and then I have C, and then I put T and G. So you see why this is very important shortly. So this method is going to make your life a lot easier to calculate the rest of the numbers. So just take a moment to fill this out. So I'll just go in a little bit more details to help you understand. I is the indicated airspeed. Your C is your calibrated airspeed, which is your CAS. And then the T is for your true airspeed, which is the TAS. And then G is for your ground speed. So you will see shortly, we put a CAS in here. Whatever true airspeed we get, we'll put that in here, and then whatever ground speed we get, we have the GS here for the ground speed, we put that in here. So like I said, calculations for the top of climb, this row which is for the top of climb is special, so you want to think about the flow this way. So special because we have to get special numbers. Like I explained earlier, we're just climbing out of the airport. We're not immediately just going from the ground all the way to 4,500 feet, right? So we'll have to make a gradual climb. So in order to do that, we'll have to go to the POH of the aircraft to actually calculate these numbers. So you get these numbers from the POH. What I personally usually do is I get those numbers, I put them all here first for my top of climb, and then I transfer them onto my navlog. So you can do this as well, or whatever other method works for you, feel free. But it's just the concept I want you to really understand from this. So if you come out here to the POH, what you want to do is go to the time, fuel, and distance to climb table. So I have the time, fuel, and distance to climb table here. And on this table, it gives you the conditions on which the climb for the aircraft is occurring. So obviously you want to make sure you're using the right POH for your airplane. If your airplane doesn't have this, you look for something that corresponds to the parameters for time, fuel, and distance to climb table. So it gives you the parameters with flaps off, full throttle, and it's assuming standard temperature in this scenario. So what you want to do is figure out your pressure altitude. So for the sake of this flight, we're using the median climb altitude, which is at about 2,250, which is closer to 2,000, right? So if we come out here, we get the climb speed, KIAS. So KIAS is our not indicated airspeed. So this will be our indicated airspeed right here. So if we use this table right here, come close to 2,000, we get 73 knots. So that will be our indicated airspeed for that altitude according to what the manufacturer says. So we have 73 KIAS. So once we have KIAS, this is why I like using this method. It's easy to calculate the calibrated airspeed for our climb, because there's another table here on the POH. If you come back here, there's another table. If you go back a few pages, there's a table that helps you do the airspeed calibration correction. So if you come to the airspeed calibration table, you want to make sure you're looking at the normal static source, because if you look here, there's an alternate static source table. So you only want to use the alternate static source table if you're flying with the alternate static source. But in most cases, the aircraft usually has the normal static source, so we will want to use that. So the configuration we looked at was for flaps up, so we're going to use just this section to make the conversion from our KIAS to KCAS, and this is how we get our KCAS, the CAS. So if we come, we have 73 here, and the next number we have is 80. So it looks like 73 is closer to 80, and we'll just stay right here. And if you notice, whenever you have any indicated airspeed that's close to 70, the table says your approximate calibrated airspeed is about the same thing. So this basically just means when we come back here to our navlog, our calibrated airspeed is pretty much going to be 73 kCAS. So basically use the table to get your conversion value. So now that we found our KCAS, once you have your KCAS, you can calculate your true airspeed. So this is sort of like the idea we use in this method, because if you have the indicated, which you get from the POH, you can get your calibrated as well from the indicated in the POH, and then you could get your true airspeed from the calibrated as well. But this is not directly in the POH, is a slightly different method you use to calculate the true airspeed, which I will show you shortly. So while I have the calibrated airspeed here, I'll just come down here and I'll add my calibrated airspeed here. So put this down here slightly to help me out, and I can add my text here a lot easier. So I guess 73, so that goes in there for your CAS. So I do not want you to confuse that with the bottom section. So the next thing will be to calculate our true airspeed, and we'll put that here. So in order to calculate your true airspeed, it's important to have your E6B. So we use the E6B to calculate that. So usually I use my physical E6B, but because I'm on the computer here, I believe it will be a lot easier if we use a tool online. So I do have access to a tool here, and this is not my tool by any chance. I'll give credit to whoever has the tool. It's E6B Flight Simulator here. So if you have your E6B, it should basically be in this configuration as well. So what you want to do is come down here to where it says airspeed correction, and this is how you will be able to calculate your true airspeed. So if you read here, it says to set the pressure altitude opposite the temperature, which is degrees, in the opposite window. So opposite your CAS on the inner scale, read the true airspeed on the outer scale. And then if you're looking for the density altitude, you can also read the density altitude on the center, which is this right here. So we'll probably want to take your time to learn how the E6B works, but if you read everything on here, it really makes it easy to read everything that has to do with the E6B. So just to give you a quick overview of how we work on this, it tells you to set the pressure altitude opposite the temperature in the window. So this is the pressure altitude right here, I could use this scale or I could use this scale. Well, I'll use this scale for the purpose of this tutorial. It says a pressure altitude in thousands of feet, and if we come back here, the altitude we're using here is about 2,250, right? So if I use that, if I come back here, pressure altitude in thousands of feet is at the bottom here. So I see here it goes from 0 to 5, and it's in thousands of feet. So I have 0, 1,000, 2,000. So I'm basically looking at this line right here, and then I need to set it opposite the temperature in degrees. So the temperature right now is about 21 degrees Celsius. So I need to look for 21 degrees and then line that up with 2,000. So the temperatures at the top here, it goes from 0 to plus 50. So it means each one is probably about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So 20 from 0, 20 to plus 50 will be this right here. So I just line that up with my 2,000 feet pressure altitude. So I just do that nicely. 2,250 roughly, so I'll go slightly after. So that about lines it up right there. That's what I'm looking at right there. It's about 2,000 lined up with about, oops, right there, lined up with about 20 degrees, 21 degrees, 20 degrees, almost the same thing, right? So it says once you line that up, opposite the cast on the inner scale. So this here is considered the inner scale, and this out here is considered the outer scale. So opposite the cast on the inner scale, read true airspeed on the outer scale. So also, if you see, it tells you, it writes it on there, the cast. So the cast is on this scale right here, and then the TAS is on the outer scale right here, and all the way out here. So what I'm going to do is, since I have my cast here, which is 73, so I'll just go read 73 on there. So I'll just come on this scale and look for 73. This is 70 here, so 73 somewhere here, 71, 2, 3, and then I just read my true airspeed on the other side. So it looks like my true airspeed is going to be, if this is 70, this is 75, this is 73. My true airspeed is going to be approximately, I'll probably say about 76. So I'll come back here. And put my true airspeed as 76. So since I have that, my true airspeed is 76, so I come down here, I put that in there as 76. So that's how you get that right there. So I know it feels like it's a lot, but just bear with me. Usually if you have like a straight route, it gets a lot easier with the calculations, but if you have like, you know, different turns in the route, you know, you have to keep calculating each number line by line. If you do this over a couple of times, it gets easier, but at first it may feel like it's overwhelming, but trust me, it's really easy. So the next thing you want to do is figure out your ground speed while you're doing this. So in order to get your ground speed, it's important to also move on to this section here while you're calculating your true course and your wind correction angles, because you also use your E6B to do this, right? So what you want to do is move on to this section first and then get your true course. So we already have our course here. We just transfer that. We transfer that to this section here. That's 288. Then the next thing we need to do is figure out the wind correction angle. So while you're figuring out the wind correction angle, you'll be able to get your ground speed. So in order to do that, You also see why, because you have your true airspeed, you can easily get this done. I'll show you why shortly, because we have to use our E6B for this step as well. So if you come into this step, what you want to do is pull up your E6B. In this situation, I'll go to, I can use this E6B right here. It gives you wind direction. It gives you the the instructions here actually. So if you have like a physical copy of your E6B, this will make it a lot easier to follow along as well. And I also do have another E6B here I could use. I'll use this because it gives me everything step by step. So what you can do is, for the E6B, just read the steps. So it says place the wind direction under the true index. So if I come back here to my navlog, I have my wind direction already for this section, right? So my wind direction is 53 degrees at 5 knots. So I'll come here and put 53 degrees at 5 knots. So this is 53, so this is 50, so 53 will be somewhere here. I'll just put that under the true index right there, line that up with this 0 that says true index. Yeah, slightly right there, it's perfect. And then I can hit next here. So if you're using the physical E6B, just use your hand to twist it. It's pretty straightforward. And then it says to mark the wind velocity up from the center point. So what you want to do is, usually you need to set this at like a line here. Any line would work as long as it's on a number here, should be fine. So my wind velocity is 5 knots. So from this point to this point, they're in scale of 10. So the middle point right there will be at about 5 knots right there. So you see, automatically puts that right there for me as 5 knots. And then the next thing I want to do is place the true course under the true index. So I come back here to my navlog and look for my true course here. It's 288 degrees. So I put that under the true index. So I look for 288 degrees. So 288 is all the way here. So I'll just turn this to 288 right there. It's pretty close to right there. Shows me 288. I'll place that under the true index right there. And then the next thing I do, this next step, I slide the wind velocity mark to the true airspeed. So you see, this is where it's important to calculate your true airspeed, and how knowing your true airspeed helps you find out your ground speed. So we slide the wind velocity mark to the true airspeed. So this is the wind velocity mark. So I'll just use this to slide it to the true airspeed. So my true airspeed I found in this row for the top of climb, it was 73 or 76. So 76 looks like it's all the way down here. So this 70, this is 80, so 76 is going to be slightly above right there. I see it gives me 76 right there. So that looks good. So the next step, it tells you your ground speed reads under the center. So under the center of this other circle right here, this is the center of the E6B, is your ground speed, and it looks like it's very close to 80 right there, so about 79. See, it tells you here your ground speed is 79. So I come back here to my navlog. I put my ground speed there as 79 first, GS, and I come out here to this section and I put my ground speed as 79. And then I also come back to my E6B. So while I'm doing this, there's two things I'm going to get from this section. I'm going to get the ground speed, and I'm also going to get my wind correction angle. So I have the wind correction angle. It tells you reads between the center line and the wind velocity mark. So this is the center line here, the center line right here, and this is the wind velocity mark. So each one, I believe, is in 2 degrees. So it looks like. This is the first one, is in between 2 and 4 right there, so it gives me 3, roughly about 3 degrees right there. So my wind correction angle is 3 degrees. So in order to figure out if it's a positive or negative, you have to look on your E6P. Sometimes it tells you what direction. If it's on the right side, you can take a look at this. For example, it tells you your wind correction angle. If it's on the right side, it's plus. If it's on the left side, it's negative. So this situation was on the right side, so it's a +3. So that's how you figure that out. If it was on the left side, it will be a -3. So I come back here on my navlog and put my wind correction angle. So here you see, also here it tells you if it's on the right side it's a plus, left side is a minus. So I put 3 right here. 3 is positive. And once you get this, the true course, is easy for you to move on to calculating your true heading. So you just add that 3 to 288 and you get your true heading. So I'll just try to make this smaller so I can fit that in there. So 288 plus 3, I'm going to get my true heading to be 291. So that's how I get my true heading. So since I have this, the next thing I need to go is at the bottom here is to calculate my east or west variation. So variation, basically, if we come back here to the slides, it tells us about variation right here. The variations are the lines right there. So this is what it looks like on the sectional chart right there. So if we come back here to our sectional chart, actual sectional chart, on our route, we'll have to look for the closest line of variation to figure out what our variation is. So it looks like the closest line of variation is right here on the map. It's this right here that says 6 degrees west. See our route here. So this, our variation is basically 6 degrees west for the purpose of this plan. So I'll come back to the navlog here, and it says plus for west, so I'm going to put +6, or you can just put 6, but I like to put +6 just to help me understand. And then once you get your variation, the next thing you want to do is similar to what we did back here. We added this or subtract this to get this. The same thing we do with this. We add or subtract to get the magnetic heading. So 291 plus 6 will pretty much give us a magnetic heading of 271. And then once we get that, the next thing we need to do is get the deviation and then add or subtract that to get the compass heading. So the deviation is, if we come back here, every aircraft typically has like a compass card that gives you like your deviation markings in the cockpit. So you want to look for something that looks like this. So this is not the specific one for this aircraft, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to be using this as a guide on how to calculate the deviation. So we got our, come back here, we'll take a look at what we have here for our magnetic heading is 271, and basically what we're going to do is look for 271 degrees on, or whatever is close to 271, which is going to be the west heading. So it says for a certain heading, steer this heading. So in this case it says for west is 270 degrees, which is the closest to 271. So it says to steer 274. So that's about a +3 degrees. So what we'll do is basically just now assume for 271 heading the deviation is plus 3 degrees. So we'll come back here and put plus 3 on our deviation. And then once you figure out what your deviation is, you can pretty much just add that to get what your compass heading is. So in this case it's going to be 274. So our compass heading is basically what we actually fly at this point during the flight. This is what we fly in the cockpit to make sure we're on course, because our winds here affects the true course by the wind correction angle, and then the variation on the aircraft, or the variation of the magnetic courses, and then the deviation on the aircraft also affects all these headings. So we have to adjust to get the compass heading we have to fly in the aircraft. So that's the general idea. So if we come back here, the next thing we'll intuitively move to calculating is the distance. So if you notice, we already calculated the distance for most of these points. So in order to get the distance here, you could leave this empty, or you can figure out how much distance it will take to actually get to the top of climb. So what you can do in this case is come back here to the time and fuel and distance to climb table and see what it tells you. So if you remember, we used this altitude right here. This is the closest to the medium climb altitude, and it tells us the distance if we're climbing is going to be about 4 nautical miles. So all we can do is come back here, and remember, from the airport to this first checkpoint is going to be 7 nautical miles. So if we take away 4 nautical miles, this is where you have to make sure you get your math right. If you can use a pencil and just, if we take 7 away from 4, this will end up being 3 nautical miles to get to the first checkpoint, and then you'd have to update that to 4 nautical miles as the time, distance, and climbs table suggested. So you see, if you add this 2, 4 plus 3, you end up having 7 that we had here. So this is another way to go through the calculations, or you could just leave this empty. But if you come in to calculate all this, then you'll be left with nothing to really calculate. So I always suggest updating this number and just making the adjustment to this spot right there. So if you add everything up again, we'll still end up getting the same number we have here. So that's the idea. So the next thing we'll do is we'll move on to the next section, which is time. So it's going to calculate the expected time en route. So in order to calculate the expected time en route, we can use our E6B, or for the top of climb section, what we can also do is go to the POH and see how much time it says it will take. So in this case, it says 3 minutes. But in order to help me have a more accurate number, I could also use my E6B, because I already have a speed and distance. I can calculate my time. So if I use my E6B and get my numbers, in order for me to be sure my numbers are correct, it needs to be close to this number right here for me to get like an accurate, double check my readings, right? So what you can do using your E6B is you can come out here. I'll go to the front of the E6B here. So it tells you to set your miles per hour or knots and speed under this, and depending on if you have your distance, which is on the outer scale, and your time, which is on the inner scale, you can line them up and get whatever parameter you're looking for. So at least as long as you have 2 of this from this 3 value equation, you can get the other number. So if we come back here, we have our distance and we have our speed. So we're going to line this up on the E6B and see what we get. So 4 nautical mile distance and 79 knots ground speed. We'll see what time we get. So we're at 4 nautical miles and 79 knots. So 79 knots is the speed. So basically just set this here, which is this right here. We set that to 79 knots, which is going to be right there, close to 80. And distance is 4 nautical miles. So distance is on the outer scale. So this is 40 here. So this is where the E6B gets a little bit weird. Even though this says 40, you can use it as a 4. So I'll use that as 4 on the outer scale, and then I'll look on the inner scale and it gives me time. So 30 here is pretty much 3, just because we use 40 for 4, 30. So you see just a little bit after 30, which is roughly 3 minutes right there. So I can use that as my time. So if you notice, if you come out to the POH also here, if we use that line, it matches. So that's how we know we're correct for this section. For other parts of the navlog, you might not be able to have or you probably don't have a table to double check, so you will have to use your E6B to calculate that, or to make that speed, time, and distance calculation. So we'll come back here to our navlog and fill out the numbers. So we have 3 minutes right there. So that's going to be our expected time on route through our top of climb right there. So the next thing we'll do is to get our ETA. So assuming, if we left at 20 Zulu, so we can put our time off here, 20:00 Zulu, and our ETA would basically just be 20:03 right here. So I'll just leave the ETA blank for now, because it's pretty straightforward and intuitive to understand that. And then the next thing you will have to calculate is your fuel. So for this section here, for the top of climb section, it will be easy to get your fuel, because you can come out to the POH here. It tells you how much fuel you're burning for this section. So it's about 0.8. So if you see, we got 4, 0.8, and 3. Pretty much got everything from the time, fuel, and distance to climb table. And you could double check those numbers with your E6B. So it gives 0.8 here for the fuel. So just to double check with the E6B, I can come out here. It tells you if you have your gallons per hour, you can get your total gallons. Or if you have your total gallons, it takes you to fly. You could get your time by setting the gallons per hour. So we already got that from the table, so I'll leave that at that. So that's pretty much how you fill out this whole section here for the top of climb. It's the only one that's a little bit complicated, but other than that, everything else should be pretty straightforward. So the next step will be to calculate. You see, if you follow this method, we already pretty much filled everything out here. So the next thing will be to calculate the true airspeed. So for this, en route, we're not really calculating the CAS anymore. We're just calculating the true airspeed for the next checkpoint. So because at this point we're already cruising, what we will need is our cruise performance. So we need access to the cruise performance table. So if you come here to the POH, this page here gives you the cruise performance table. And in order to get your numbers, I already went in depth in another video on how to calculate our performance numbers. So I went in depth into how to get the numbers for your standard temperature. So if you want to watch the performance video to understand how to do that, you're very welcome. Check the link in the description for the details, or just check the other supplement topic we did on performance, on how to use your cruise performance table. But for the purpose of this flight, I'll just do a quick run through on how to obtain the cruise performance numbers for this scenario I'm working on. So my pressure altitude, if I'm cruising roughly, we're going to be probably at about 4,500 is the closest to 4,000. So I'll use this section right here, but for my temperature, I'm pretty much going to be interpolating between these two, because I see my ISA is about 12 degrees above the standard temperature. So it's not exactly at 20 degrees, it's at 12 degrees. So I could choose to use 20 just to be a little bit more conservative with my numbers. So actually I'm going to use 20 degrees above standard, which means I'm just going to use the numbers in this part, this last 3 parts of the table. So I'll have to choose my power setting here. So zooming on, like fly, not too fast, but with a decent amount of power, I'll fly at 2,400. So I'm going to be using this rule here for 4,000. So my maximum continuous power is about 57, and then my true airspeed is going to be 107. My gallons per hour, which is what I'm really looking for right now, is going to be 8.1. So I have 2 numbers I need to put in my navlog from this table right now, just for making that determination. And this is how you explain this portion if you're in a Checkride. So I get 107 knots for my true airspeed, and I get 8.1 gallons per hour for my how much fuel I'm burning per hour. So 107 and 8.1. So I have 107 here, and then my 8.1 goes here, up here for my GPH. So when I'm cruising, I'm pretty much going to be burning 8.1 gallons, and my true airspeed is going to be 107. So because, and this is how I tell you it gets easier, because my route is pretty much a straightforward route, my true airspeed for all these points is pretty much going to be the same thing. So I'll copy that, and I'll just put the same thing right there. Oops. So the next thing you want to do is come over here and calculate the true course for this section right here on to the next checkpoint, which is highway I-4. So in order to calculate the true course, you already have the true course here, so you can move that over here. And then to get the wind correction angle, if you remember, we have to use the E6B, right? So once we use the E6B, we get the wind correction angle, and we also get the ground speed. So that's sort of going to be the general flow we go through in calculating the rest of this stuff right here. So we have the E6B here, and we put the course, I believe. You can just go back to the very first step here to start afresh. This is to place the wind direction under the true index. So the wind direction is 53 degrees at 5 knots. So we do 53 degrees, 5 knots. That's that right there. And then 5 knots. So it says the next thing is mark wind velocity up from the center point. So center point will be at this point. It's going to be right there. 5, right there is 5. This time I have it at the center of 2 thick lines. So 5 is just going to be to the next thick line right there. So the next thing is to place the true course under the true index. So my true course is 288 degrees. Right there. So the next thing it says to slide the wind velocity mark to the true airspeed. So I'm just going to slide this to the true airspeed is 107. So I'll come down here to 107. And then I get my wind correction angle 2 degrees and my ground speed 110 degrees. So this is 2 degrees here. It's to the right, so it's most likely going to be positive. And then my ground speed is 110 knots. So I come back here, I put +2. And then I come back here to my ground. speed. My ground speed is going to be 110. So that's how you do that. So once you get this done, in order to save some time, as long as you have the same wind conditions, you should be able to, and the same true airspeed, you should be able to pretty much transfer the same numbers you got here and here, and also as long as your true course is the same thing. So for this next checkpoint, it's pretty much going to be the same thing because our wind is the same thing, our course is the same thing, and our true airspeed is the same thing. So I'll put 288 here. I'll put +2. And then I'll put here 110. And now it's ground speed. So you see this just saved you some, energy in calculating over and over again. And you're slowly filling everything out. So even when it comes to this point right here, I could pretty much approximate, because you see 53 knots and 5 knots is not too different from 51 knots and 3 knots. So the numbers are very close to each other. So I can assume my numbers will stay the same for the most part. So if my wind was like drastically different, then I'll probably have to recalculate these numbers here and a new ground speed, but the numbers are pretty close to each other, so I'll keep it the same. And if you explain yourself this way in the Checkride, the examiner would understand things like this as well, as long as it's reasonable. If it's not reasonable, then it's a no-no. You'd have to recalculate those numbers. So you don't want to like get lazy and not actually calculate those numbers, right? So put that 110 there, and I'll just do the same thing all the way down here. +2, and this will be 110 here as well. The same thing here. We'll just verify it's 288 still, 107. The winds is pretty close, pretty much getting the same numbers. So same idea all the way through here, 288. So the next thing you could do is come here and calculate the true heading. Come back up here. So we already know how to calculate the true heading. It's going to be, you add this to this and get that number right there. So the variation really doesn't change, and the deviation, for the most part, it looks like once we add all these numbers up, you're pretty much going to be the same since it's a straight line. So just remember, if the numbers change, obviously you have to do a new calculation, but since it doesn't change, I'll just assume all these numbers are pretty much going to be the same thing for this whole section right here. So I'll fill this out to save some time in the final version, but I'll move on to this section here, and we'll zoom. We're pretty much done filling everything out here. So in the final version of this, you can review to see the full thing. But the next important portion is here, where we have to fill out the expected time on route and our fuel on route, right? So this is important because we have to use our E6B over here. So like I said earlier, for speed and distance calculations and time, if you have either speed or distance, you can calculate time. If you have just the speed and time, you can calculate distance. If you have just distance and time, you can calculate the speed. So here we already have the distance and speed, so we can calculate time, right? So the expected time on route here is what we're looking for. So here you need to be a little bit more careful because the distances are usually different. Even if you're flying a straight route, your checkpoints are at a few nautical miles away from each other, so you want to verify that. But I'll just do a couple here, and then you should be able to understand how to fill out the rest of them. So the distance here is 3 nautical miles, and the ground speed here is 110 nautical miles. So what I'll do is go to my E6B here. I'll use this one and go to the wind side. I'll go to the roll side. Here I'll use this formula here that says if you have your speed, distance over time, you can do that. So we have our speed and we have our distance, 3 nautical miles. So we'll set our speed here, which is 110. So we'll take this and put it at 110, which will be right there at 11, right there will be 110. And then what we can do is, it says once you set this, your distance is outer and time is inner. So we have our distance, which is 3 nautical miles, so that will be 30 here, and then our time will be in here. So it looks like it's in between 16 and 17. So what that is telling us is basically telling us it will take roughly about 1.6 minutes to about 1.7 minutes, I'll assume. So if you use the scale, you can kind of like understand the scale in that manner to help you understand the time difference. So, or to help you understand the scale, I should say. So this will be 1.6 to 1.7 minutes, so close to about 2 minutes. So I'll just round it up to about 2 minutes just to be on the safe side, because 1.6, 1.7 minutes is pretty much 2 minutes. So I'll come back here to my expected time on route and put 2 minutes on there. And then the next, I'll come down here and do the same thing for this checkpoint where I have 110 speed but 6.5 nautical miles distance. So I'll come to my E6B and do 110. So I'll just leave that right there since it's the same speed, and just look for 6.5. So 6.5. It's right there in between 6 and 7. I'm looking there, shows me about 3.5 minutes, which I can easily round up to be 4 minutes just to be on the safe side. I'll see, that would be 4 minutes right there. Make this smaller. So it'll take me 4 minutes to fly from this checkpoint all the way down to this checkpoint right here. So that's from my Airflow all the way down to the warehouses right there. If we look on the map, this is what we have. Basically from I-4 right there. I have I-4 all the way down to where I have the warehouses here. So that says it will take me about 4 minutes for that leg. Then I'll come back here and pretty much just fill everything else out here. So I'll do the same method, calculate it on the E6B and just fill these numbers out. So just to save some time, I'll fill that out off camera and make sure you have the full number here. So the next thing I'll come on to here is to calculate the fuel. So the fuel is basically how we calculated the other version, where we have our gallons per hour and we have our time we're flying for each route, so we can easily just calculate how much fuel we'll burn on that leg. So once we do that, we'll add everything up and put that here. So all the empty spaces here, we're just pretty much filling out when we're flying. So I'll just take another steps to explain this so you can fully understand how to do that. So I have my gallons per hour and route here is 8.1. So I have my time, so I'll go to my E6B here and calculate. So I'll just turn this here, as you can see your gallons per hour 8.1. So I want to set this at 8.1 right there. So this 8.1 right there, 8.1 is just slightly after 80 right there. That's 81. It could be 8.1. So I have my time. So once I get my time, it will be on the inner scale. I'll just look at what's on the outer scale to get how much fuel I'm actually going to burn. So here also you need to do the whole math thing to make sure it makes sense. So the time, it says here on the navlog, is going to be about 2 minutes. So I'm flying for 2 minutes. So I'll try to see 2 minutes. So time is on the inner, so I just look for where I have 2. So 2 is going to be here, right here. 20 right here will be 2. So if 20 right here is 2, on the outer scale will give me how much total gallons I'm burning. So 2 on the opposite side will be in between 25 and 30. Directly opposite that will be, I'll probably say this is 25. We have 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So we have 25, 26, 27. So roughly about 2.7 minutes, right? So I have 2 minutes, so roughly about 2.7 gallons. Sorry about that. Will be 2.7 gallons. So this is 2 minutes here, will be 2.7 gallons here. And as always, you can see it tells you here US gallons is red on this scale. So I have 2.7 gallons. I'll come back here and put that in here. And you see it cannot be 27 gallons because you need to look at the scale, right, to understand what number goes in here. So I'll do the same thing for this section here in order to calculate the gallons per hour I'm burning. So I'll be flying for 4 minutes at 8.1 gallons per hour. So how many total gallons am I going to be using, right? So I'll come back to my E6B. I'll leave my 8.1 gallons per hour. I'll look for 4 minutes, which is right here. I'm not gonna use this because this is 4 hours, right? I'll use 40 right here. This is the minutes and section side and seconds. So 4 comes out here. I get about, this is 50. It lines up with 54, so about 5.4 gallons. So 4 minutes. Yeah. So, or that will probably be about 0.54 gallons, just because it doesn't make sense to me to fly for 4 minutes and I'll be burning 5.4 gallons. It's a little bit too much. So I'll probably have to adjust the other numbers as well. I'll probably have to adjust this to 0.27. Because for 2 minutes I cannot be burning 2.7 gallons. It just made sense to me right now. So this will be 0.54. This will be 0.27. Sorry about that, but just make the slight correction here. 0.54. And then I'll pretty much do the same thing once I get my expected time on route here, all the way down here. And I'll add everything up to get my total time on route. So if I get my time on route, if it does not match what I feel it will take me to fly there, it means my scale is probably wrong. But that will just give you an idea of how to adjust the numbers and calculate your scale. And also the same thing for the fuel. If you're getting like maybe more than 50 gallons, it means you've made a mistake on doing the scale. So you probably have to, divide by 100, or just change the numbers a little bit, divide by 10 and get the accurate scale, and put your numbers in here. So that's how you calculate that. So I'll have a full version filled out for you, and we'll review those numbers again just to make sure we're on the right track. So in order to save some time, I went ahead and I decided to finish up the navlog off camera. So I'm going to review and summarize everything right now to show you the most important parts of how I finished up everything. But before I do that, I want to bring your attention to the first line here. Looks like earlier my calculator gave me the wrong number when I did the quick math here. It gave me 270 something, I believe, but just going through it off camera, I figured that was wrong, and I made the correction here. So please, sorry for that. Just take note of the correction here. We calculated the true heading by adding this to that to get this, and then our variation is the local magnetic variation on the sectional chart. It's +6, and then we add 6 to 291, we get 297, and then we add the deviation. So for 297, if we come here to the deviation card we're using for the purpose of this tutorial, 297 is closest to 300, and the deviation will be about +3. So I used +3 here, which gives us 300 degrees for the compass heading, which makes more sense if you look at the direction the course actually goes on the sectional chart. So I don't know why I didn't catch that, but it's been a long day, so I caught that off camera, so that's good. So please just make this correction, and I'll be putting a copy of this for you to download as well. If you're logged into the Pilot Ground Briefs course, you should be able to download a copy of this and review that on your free time. But just to recap everything, we're pretty much done with the second part. So our course is a pretty straight line, so for the most part the true course calculations are pretty much going to be similar. So that's why we end up having 299 on the compass heading here all the way to our destination. So there's going to be a few changes when we come into this section where we have to calculate our ETE. So I went ahead and finished the calculation for the ETE and fuel used from each checkpoint to each checkpoint. So I'll just show you how I calculated this right here. And so basically, like I said, if we do have speed or distance, we can calculate time, or if we have like time and speed, we can calculate distance, and vice versa, right? So the same thing here, I just used my E6B. So for a distance of 6.5 and a ground speed of 110 knots, I wanted to find my ETE here. So how I got 4 was I came back to my E6B here and I put my ground speed here at 110. So 11 here pretty much represents 110, and then I look for where that ground, where the distance is 6.5, because I need my time. So I look for the distances on the outer scale. So 6.5 is about right there. So 6.5 is in between 60 and 70. So that's 6.5 right there, about 65. So it looks like it falls on about 3.5 seconds, I'll say. So I just approximated that to give me a little bit more time. I rounded that up to 4 minutes. So that's why I put 4 minutes here on the sectional chart. So approximately 4 minutes for 6.5. And then if you come to a distance of 7.3 as well, since I have my E6B set up here at 110, it's a lot easier. Once you have it set up for steps like this, usually as long as your ground speed doesn't change, it becomes a lot easy. So 7.3 will be somewhere there. So you see it's almost 4 minutes as well. So that is how you calculate that. It ends up giving you 4 minutes right here. So if you do for 11 nautical miles, we already set the E6B at 110. So let's see what 11 miles will give us. So 11 miles, actually 11 nautical miles matches up with, you know, where we put the speed thing. But just remember, this time around we're looking for the time, right? So it looks like it's going to be, if this is 55 right here, that's about 5.5 minutes. So this will be about 6 minutes right here. So it should be 6 minutes right there for 11 nautical miles. So, you know, you could go on and do the same thing for everything here and figure out what the expected time on route is. You know, you can grab your E6B if you have a physical copy at home and just do it, or, you know, you can go online and just play with the one I was using as well. They currently have the tool out there for free, and I think they have like a paid version as well. And this is not a paid post, you know, I'm just putting it out there. So the next thing I did was to calculate the fuel used for each point. So once I'm done, when I finished this, I went ahead and calculated the fuel. I did the same thing for this section. I calculated the fuel. So, you know, that's how you want to go about doing that. So the way we were calculating the fuel was, you know, since we already found our GPH earlier, all we just have to do is set our GPH on the E6B and then just look for the time and then figure out how much fuel we're burning. So, you know, for 4 minutes, you're pretty much going to get 0.55, and the same thing is 4 minutes here, so it's the same thing for your fuel burn. And then 6 is going to be slightly different, so I'll just show you how I did this real quick so we can take a look. So the GPH was 8.1, so I set this to 8.1 because it says here to set your GPH with this black arrow right here. So I set that on 8.1 right there. So that's 80, 81, so that's 8.1. And then I look for my time. So I'm on this, my time is 6 minutes. So I need to look for where 6 minutes matches with the amount of gallons used. So I come out here in the inner scale is my time, which is 6 minutes right here. So actually ends up lining up on the opposite side. So 6 minutes will give me about 0.81 gallons. In this case, it's not 8.1 anymore, so it's 0.81, because if we're flying, if 8.1 is gallons is per hour, and then we have 6 minutes, it means it's just going to be 0.81 gallons for flying for 6 minutes. So that's how it works. That's how you want to think about that. And then I went ahead, did the same thing for 5 minutes. 5 minutes turns out to be about 0.67. And as you can see here, the same place where I have 5 minutes flying time, I pretty much just copied 0.67 on there. So how I got the 0.67 is the same thing. We come back to the E6B and look for where we have 5 minutes. We have 5 minutes here. You see it ends up lining up with about 0.68 or 0.67. So 0.67 right there, right there. And 3 minutes, it's the same thing. We come to the E6B and look for where we have 3 minutes right here on the inner scale. It matches up with about 4.1 or almost 4.1. So that's 0.41 gallons. So almost have a gallon of fuel burned to fly for 3 minutes, which makes sense to me. So when I did all this, I just added everything up and it gave me about 32 minutes, which means it's going to take me about 32 minutes to fly from here to here. And mind you, this is with this airspeed right here. Considering this airspeed right here, considering like my, wind correction angle, everything here, And also I calculated everything, added everything up for my gallons per hour to find out how many gallons I'm going to be burning to, you know, get to this destination here. And then finally I come up here to my notes, and since I'm going to be departing at about 20:00 Zulu, that's almost nighttime if you're like you know, depending on, you know, what time you're looking at, but I would just assume it's, you know, 8 o'clock at night. So I'm saying, okay, it's gonna be a VFR night flight. I didn't get like a night reserve fuel. Per VFR regulations is 45 minutes extra at 8.1 gallons per hour. That's roughly about 6.1 gallons. So if I'm burning 8.1 gallons per hour, so flying for 45 minutes will be that. And then I just calculate my minimum fuel load. It's the total fuel I need plus my reserve, and it gives me a minimum fuel load. So this does not mean I just have to fly with 10.83 gallons. I could obviously go with more, but for the purpose of this tutorial and to complete this flight, for the purpose of this flight, this is how much fuel I need to get to my destination and have enough to fly for my reserve according to the regulations. So yeah, this brings us to the end of how to fill out a navlog. And just to recap everything for you, the first thing you want to do is, you know, pick out your checkpoints. Go to your sectional chart, draw a straight line from your departure airport to your destination. You know, pick out your checkpoints and measure the distances, and come back here, put your checkpoints there and put the distances in here. Out of the distance, make sure it matches whatever you have on ForeFlight. And then if you want to use VORs, you could get the VOR identifier, or you could use the Morse code, and you could put the frequencies on there for each route. And then, you know, get your course, pick an altitude, and then, you know, you get your wind from your winds aloft chart. And then, you know, you start with the top of climb calculations. You get your ICTG from the POH, the first two from the POH, and then the last two you use your E6B. And then I could just put a note there to help you remember how I got these ones. So I got the indicated airspeed from the POH, the calibrated was from the POH, and the true airspeed was from the E6B. So I'll just add a note there to help you remember if you're going to be using this method. So that's that. So once you get these numbers from your top of climb, you just transfer them here, especially the CAS, the true airspeed, and the ground speed. Once you get those, you know, if you didn't see where I did these calculations, just go back to the early parts of the video to see how we calculated everything here. So once you're done with your top of climb numbers, which you most likely get these numbers from your time, distance, and fuel to climb table, you can move on to, you know, your checkpoints and find your cruise performance gallons per hour and finish up the rest of the calculations. And that's how you fill out the navlog. So the other thing is you want to fill out, you know, your frequencies here and your weather, the frequencies here and the weather for your departure and your destination point, just to make sure, you know, you have it filled out to the max. And then another thing you can do is, you know, come down to the weather log, you know, fill out your weather as well. And then you can come down to the flight plan. I also have my flight plan filled out here. This is how I fill out my flight plan. Put the airport. If you're coming back to this airport here, you just put dash KISM if it's a return flight. But for the purpose of this scenario, I'll just keep it as KISM to KBKV. if you're choosing an alternate, you put your alternate airport there. If you have full tanks, you put the amount of full tanks you have in terms of hours and minutes, not in gallons. Then you put your aircraft color. If you have any remarks, you could put the remarks there. But that's the general idea. So I hope I've helped you understand how to fill out a navlog, and thank you for joining me in this session. I'll see you on the next one.